In a couple of weeks, hopefully, I'm gonna have a corporate shoot. And I did one a couple of months ago with the same setup as I have right now. And one of the things that I want to do more of this year is those corporate shoots. But one of the things that I'm weak on is lighting, and especially if there's a window in the background, which we have in here in my childhood home where I'm shooting right now as I'm back in Europe. If you follow the channel for a while, you might know I've been traveling around. Not anymore. So since I'm back here and I have power available and all the usual things you would have, I thought I would just do a quick test to see where the limitations are in terms of the lighting mainly, and how far I can push things if there is a window in the background. Because the one I shot 2 or 3 months ago was luckily with some blinds and windows that dimmed them enough that it wasn't really an issue. And these are only 100-watt lights. So these are the Molus X100s. Corp lights, very good for traveling, but they have the limitations in only being 100 watts. So I'm very curious to see how far I can actually push things and what compromises I will have to do while doing so. I am going to first try to expose for the environment, for how it looks inside, because I want as much light inside as well. And I'm afraid that if I balance things wrong, I'm gonna end up with a very dark scene inside, and in the attempt to kill the light outside a little bit. So that's the first thing that I'm gonna try and see what I can do about. And the first thing we're gonna do is just see where things are lying when we are looking in the room here. So right off the bat, I can see that as we are at f2.8, everything is basically clipping outside. So I can see that there is no detail in the sky, and there's some things inside that's clipping too. So I'm going to try to put on my ND filter here. This is a Freewell 3-7 stop CPL VND. Chuck that on. Still pretty bright outside, but we just pretty much called them out. So that would be the starting point. Now, the main issue that I'm going to have now is, as much as I have detail in the clouds outside, the room looks very dark now. And since I only have one light to work with, I think that might become an issue. But let's see how far we can get just with what it looks like in here. So we have it as wide open as we can on the camera. Unfortunately, I can't do 2 stops ND because I would have loved to try that. Turn on my light. Normally I would use my phone for that, but we are currently using that to film the other angle. I'm gonna go 50% to start with. Just set things up here, kind of pretend like it's gonna be an interview setup here. Now some light came through outside, so we're still good on the exposure. And I can see 50% is definitely not enough. I don't have nearly enough exposure when I'm looking at the false color. So I'm gonna try to chug it up to 100%. So we're gonna do that here. And jump back into the scene here. Depending on where I sit, it looked like it can almost work. Like I have decent exposure here, but it still looks pretty dark on the rest of my face. So I'll have to see when I'm editing this if it can actually work or not. Now I'm just gonna pretend to talk to the wall while we're doing this to kind of see how it all works and how it looks. But I think this is gonna be too dark overall, even though we protected the sky outside. But with full ND, I'm not sure that this light is, or not full ND, 3 stops ND. It looks like the light is not powerful enough to actually give me enough exposure on my face, and I've already moved it as far forward as I could compared to where the camera is. So one thing we could do was maybe shoot closer at a wider angle and then get the light even closer to me. But I kind of like the compression. We're right now at 35 millimeters, and I rarely shoot lower than that because I just don't like it when it's too wide, at least not at the moment. So this is the first setup. This is with 3 stops ND, f2.8, full power on the light, and an overcast day outside. If this was not overcast, we would have way more problems. So I'm kind of happy that it's bad weather in Europe right now, in Denmark right now. But this is definitely the best I can do if I'm gonna protect the highlights outside as far as I can see right now with the ND that I have. So let's try without the ND filter, because we cannot get any brighter inside now, and I'm also afraid that it's too dark overall inside. So even though I'm shooting from the shadow side here and having all the light coming on the other side, and I would kind of be talking to the wall a little bit at an angle from the camera, that's kind of the idea here. I feel like it might be a little bit too dark in here, at least from just seeing the waveforms on the camera, or not the waveforms, the false color. So not sure this could actually work. Maybe it was going to be a little bit more moody, but I think overall this might be a little bit too dark. So let's sacrifice some of the highlights outside. I think the first thing I'm gonna do is just take the ND filter off here, and that immediately just gives us some clipping on the kind of table thing down here, the heater, and outside in the sky. So what we can try to do first is just to turn up the aperture to where it's not clipping anymore. We can kind of do 4.5. 4.5 just about hits it, but we've only just gotten rid of enough light that it's not clipping. It's kind of clipping a little bit depending on the sky's movement, but it could work, I think. We just can't bring it down too much without it clipping out there. So we might need to go one step up, but from an exposure perspective, it actually looks okay. I think if we do one more tag here, so now I think we're at f5.0, the exposure actually looks pretty good on my skin. Now we should be protecting the sky just enough in terms of how overcast it is today. And I think we have maybe a decent brightness in here as well. It looks like from the false color that it might be okay. So let's try and do a quick take like this, where I'm just pretending I'm doing the interview, and then I can see in post how it works. You can also help judge what you think. I'm gonna grade this the exact same way the whole way through, so you can kind of get an idea of how bright or dark it is. And if I do anything different, I'm gonna put that on the screen if I try to brighten up some parts. I am shooting 10-bit 4K, so I do have some flexibility to work around with, especially with the ZV-1 that I'm shooting on right now. But I would love to just get it right in camera and not have to fiddle around too much with it otherwise. So this would be still protecting the sky outside just by turning up the aperture. So that gives me a little bit more flexibility than what the ND can do, because the ND starts at 3 stops, the one that I have. 2 stops would have been more ideal for this, I think. But at the same time, I'm sacrificing some depth, I would imagine. We are shooting at 35 millimeters now at f5, so I don't think we have as much depth. And since I'm sitting pretty close to the table here in the background, I think we're gonna see too much of the background compared to what I would actually like to have in frame. So let's see what the last solution that we kind of have is. That's to go back down to 2.8 while still maintaining the light in here, and then we'll probably end up sacrificing some of the light outside. I'm shooting around 3 p.m. by the way, so middle day-ish. So the light is still the brightest outside. If you're shooting earlier or later, I might have a little bit softer lighting when it's this overcast, but I still think this is where the most reliability comes into in terms of testing where the lights can go. So let's try to turn this back down to f2.8. Now we're clipping the sky again, and I'm not clipping my face, so technically we could bring things down. But the problem that we get when we try to bring things down when we are clipping something outside is that it's gonna look very, very mushy and bad when we start doing that, because there is no detail out there. So as soon as you try to bring those highlights down in post, it's just gonna look weird because the information is clipping, whereas everything else will just kind of dim because there is information in that area. So that's why for me, in theory, in my head, it becomes way more important to actually nail the exposure on my skin. So right now it looks like it's too bright. I have a little bit of issues when I'm trying it out with the false color. Sometimes I feel like I do need to go a little bit brighter than what I think, but 100% on the key here with the 100 watt lights seems to be a little bit too much. So let's try and edit that a little bit here. So I think I'm just gonna go down to 50% to begin with. So that was 0 and then 50. Sit down here again. Still looks like it's a little bit too bright. Now we're at 50% light or brightness instead on the light here, and it still looks like it's a little bit too much. So I'm not sure when we start bringing things down what that will look like. I can also see the sky has moved a little bit outside now, so it's clipping a little bit more. But this would be somewhat of an exposure as well. I can see on this side of my face, the exposure looks like it might be okay. And on this side here, it looks like it is a little bit too overexposed. And again, I can easily bring that down and probably level out everything. The problem then is how much different is the sky gonna look outside. And I have some tricks in DaVinci Resolve that I could probably use to limit how much I'm trying to dim that. But it's not ideal to try and fiddle around with all these things in post, and it's not a fix it in post kind of thing that I would like to do. when I'm doing a corporate interview for a lot of money, I would love for it to just be nailed in camera and have as little problems to fix in post as possible. So that's kind of the aim here. So this still looks like it's a little bit too bright. Let's try to put it down to like 25%. This looks closer to something better, but still too bright on the skin. It is closer to what could be good though. So at 25%, this might be ideal in terms of what I need right now. The window definitely doesn't look too good when it is in Rec. 709. It definitely looks like it's completely clipping. So this could definitely be an option as well, 25%. I think if I go lower on light, it might become too dark on my face, and that could be okay because we could bring it up and that wouldn't hurt the highlights outside. Could be an option. When I did my initial testing before, I did have it down all the way to 5%, so we could quickly try that. But this is at 25%, and I think that looks okay from what I can see up here. I think I missed the white balance a little bit, but you won't be able to see that because I already fixed that in DaVinci Resolve by the time you see this. But let's try to put it down to 5% as well. So now we have it all the way down to 5%, and it still looks like it's pretty good. Now it looks like my skin is a little bit dimmer compared to the rest of the room. It's not as much contrast, there's not as much push. So it might be a little bit too much. I'm not sure about that. We'll see that when I edit it in post. But I think so far this is a pretty good test, and I'm just gonna end the video here because my whole goal was just to be able to test these things and see how far I can push things. And the first and biggest thing that I learned here is that even though it's super overcast outside, my 100-watt light is still not powerful enough to actually light me properly when I'm protecting the highlights, especially when I only have ND free stops as the lowest. So what I'll have to do is get either a better ND filter that is only 2 stops, that could be an option, but that's not going to fix the problem in most scenarios, especially if it's bright outside. So I think the better option will be to have a stronger light. And I love these 100-watt lights. If I didn't have a window in the background, it would be no trouble at all. I can easily light with these lights. But as soon as there is a window, and that sometimes are just things that I cannot control when shooting corporate projects, that's when I need something a little bit more powerful. These, by the way, also just worked great because I was traveling and they're so small. Now that I'm not traveling as much anymore, I don't need it as much as I do. So that was it for this video. If you have any ideas, questions, thoughts, leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear it. If you have any thoughts on how I could do this better as well. I am practicing my lighting. I am still not new to lighting, but I haven't nerded that much into it yet. So this is me testing, getting better, practicing, so that when I have those more important shoots, I don't stand there not knowing where the limitations lie. So that's it for this one. I will see you in the next one, and until then, take care.